calls, everything that you've done with my family. It means a lot. So.
How do you feel?
I feel great. It's a long time coming.
Yeah.
So I'm glad to be back.
All right, so that is Marine veteran Paul Whelan there speaking out about being released from Russian custody after deplaning arriving on the tarmac, greeted by President Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris, returning to the U.S. last night after being stuck in Russia for 6 years. So now this is where they are, just to keep you updated. And they are in recovery stage in Texas. The second stage is debriefing, and that's your live look here in San Antonio. So that's where all of this is going down. There are 3 phases. Right now they're in recovery. They go through a very in-depth debriefing, and then the reunion back to normal life with your family, with your friends. So that's where you are at this moment. Again, these detainees now finally freed from Russian captivity.
And Whelan isn't alone. He's joined by Russian-American journalist Aslu Kurmashiva, as well as Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich. It was part of a larger prisoner swap involving 7 other countries. Joining us now, Texas Congressman Pete Sessions. He sits on the House Oversight Committee. Congressman, welcome to the program. Of course, it is wonderful news that these Americans are home after months or years in Russian prisons. Why do you think this swap happened now?
In fact, both sides, or all 7 sides, had to make sure that they were willing to accept not only the terms and conditions, but it had a lot to do with timing. You know, they say the success of a rain dance has a lot to do with timing. And in fact, it does in prisoner exchanges. I think what's really on our plate, though, is to make sure that people know that Russia has put more than enough warnings out to say, stay out of Russia. And this is the thing that we're going to have to really focus on, because the Russians have now learned this trick. And that trick is grabbing Americans for any reason, trumping up the sources against them, and then holding them for years at a time. And it simply is something that desperate countries do. And we need to make sure that we understand that doing business in Russia is dangerous.
Yeah, I want to be clear, too. There are others that are in prison, perhaps falsely there in Russia. These aren't the only ones. These aren't the only Americans, but these are the notable figures that you've heard of for quite some time, maybe within the headlines, or if you're watching cable news or news, you know these names, Grishkovich and others. Vice President Harris was there to greet the released prisoners and then had this moment, Congressman, what critics are calling a word salad. Watch this moment.
This is just an extraordinary testament to the importance of having a president who understands the power of diplomacy and understands the strength that rests in understanding the significance of diplomacy.
So not really sure where she's going, again, describing diplomacy in that moment, but it's important to note that National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan spoke out and said that only President Joe Biden could have gotten this done. We know he stepped down from his re-election bid, and Vice President Kamala Harris stepped up. Did politics play in this at all?
Well, what played in this was simply timing. I don't make light of any of this. It had to be done. We needed to get our Americans back, and timing has a lot to do with it. But I think that regardless of that, that is something that they've been working on for a long, long time. The country needs to focus on, when they look at the 2 leaders, we have 2 people that are incapable of leading America. They may have dealt well at the table with the trade, a swap, and I think the price was probably high on our side. But we got back what we needed, and that is important. The focus now will turn to the border, inflation, spending, rule of law, and those things. And so that's the quadrant that the American people want and need. We're very pleased to get these Americans back, and we need to get them back. But there's still much more that's got to be done that this administration has failed the test on.
And God bless these Americans on their recovery, too. Spending time in a Russian prison work camp Can only imagine
7
what
years.
they've lived through and experienced. Let's move to this, Congressman. We're hearing that the Secret Service will host a news conference today around 2 p.m. regarding the investigation into the attempted assassination on former President Trump, which happened back on July 13th. What do you expect to learn from the agency today? Are you confident in the Secret Service and their investigation?
I think it's important for us to listen and listen carefully and ask questions. You have seen the highlight reels that came from the United States Senate and the House of Representatives, where there was little, if any, forthcoming data and information. They have now had several weeks to put together their scenario. What will happen with this is there will be people listening and learning. There are hundreds of people who are detailed experts on this. The House of Representatives just appointed their committee, and that bipartisan committee will be looking at every bit of this also. We need to have the Secret Service tell us inside about what their failures were, what they did wrong, and more importantly, how we can correct this. This must not happen again, not to anyone up on a stage like this that's running for president.
I think one of the major questions, it'll be acting Secret Service Director Ronald Rowe speaking out today, but there's a whistleblower claim right now that the acting Secret Service Director directed funds away from the department that oversees threat assessments. Is there validity to that? That's going to be a big question there today for the acting Secret Service Director.
I think they've got lots of questions, and as you know from their past, the right hand did not speak well of the left hand. They did not understand what they were doing. And this is where the FBI investigation will have a lot to do with this also, about the failures that the Secret Service made on this former president at a time that all the highlighted things need to be looked at carefully and analyzed.
Absolutely. The technology failures, too. I think that was another latest development. We'll be watching for it. Texas Congressman Pete Sessions, thanks so much for joining us this morning.